This morning we've heard experts describe the extent of the problem of impaired driving and the challenges we face as a state and as a nation. We've also heard valuable tips and advice on how to address tough challenges using collaboration strategies. Now we'll hear from experts from the world of enforcement talk about the critical role of collaboration plays in combating impaired driving. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions of our speakers when all the speakers have finished their presentations. Police deal with an enormous range of community problems that go well beyond fighting crime and enforcing the law. The Center for Problem-Oriented Policy acknowledges this reality and has developed a field of study that shapes the way police around the world approach their work. At its core is collaboration. In fact, the Center's website serves as a resource for the best police practices and gets more than 2 million hits a month from police officers worldwide. When it comes to drunk driving, the Center believes it is critical that law enforcement and communities work in partnership. Mike Scott directs the center, and he is ideally suited for the job. Mike was a police officer, earned a law degree from Harvard, was a police chief and a high-level police administrator in several cities, a law professor at the University of Wisconsin, and a senior researcher for the Police Executive Research Forum. I'd like to welcome and ask up now Mike Scott.
Now, there's nothing like following up that last presentation with a little bit of research. Thanks, Sean, for warming them up for me. Okay. There it is. Okay, so the Center for Problem-Oriented Policing that I direct, we're responsible for publishing these guidebooks. Many of you have copies of them. We had some ordered and they were out on the table there, including 2 on topics directly related to today's summit, on drunk driving and on drug-impaired driving. I had also hoped that we would get shipped here another publication we have on pedestrian injuries and fatalities, which we've talked about, as well as one on prescription fraud and abuse. I'd encourage you, if those are problems that you're experiencing in your community, that you would also look those up and get copies of those. I hope one day we'll be able to continue this work and produce some guidebooks on other related problems we've talked about here: age-impaired driving, sleep-impaired driving, and distracted driving. We haven't yet done those as yet. Now, I'm not going to cover all of what was in this particular publication. I was eager. I actually wrote this one myself. At the very beginning of my career, even before becoming a police officer, I studied as a research assistant to a professor at the University of Wisconsin Law School who developed the whole concept of problem-oriented policing. And the very first study we ever made of any problem to experiment with the idea happened to have been the problem of drunk driving in my home city of Madison, Wisconsin. And I worked as a research assistant on that project. So actually, even before becoming a cop, I knew a fair amount about drunk driving. And I've continued my interest in this topic all these years. So this guidebook, it's laden with a lot of dense, it's compact. It's a short guidebook, but it's going to cover much of the research that has been summarized here today and more, bring you up to speed on what we know about the problem, how you need to analyze the problem at the local level to develop specific interventions. And then the heart of the guidebooks is really to review what do we know from research and police practice about what is effective and what is relatively ineffective in dealing with the problem. This guidebook is going to cover some 32 different responses to the problem, some of which we've talked about here today. I'm not going to review all 32 in my talk with you. You can read those for yourself, but I'm going to highlight a few interesting points that I discovered in my research. Many of you know, either explicitly or implicitly, that much of police work is based on this criminological theory, deterrence theory. It's essentially that we're going to deter people from committing crime by threatening to punish them. And if you don't remember from any classes you might have taken on it, there are three elements to deterrence. Punishment must be certain. You're actually going to get punished. Punishment must be severe enough that it's going to get your attention. I don't want that to happen to me. And lastly, when you get punished, it's going to be quick. Soon after you do the bad thing, you're going to get punished. Well, as you think about this particular theory in the context of drunk driving, there's really not an awful lot that police can do about the severity of the punishment or the swiftness, so police focus mainly on the certainty with which we can punish people. Now, you think about that in the context of drunk driving, and this is where things get very difficult. The legislature can ramp up all they want the penalties for drunk driving. And the courts could administer the system efficiently in an ideal world such that the adjudication of the person's offense is quick. And if they're going to be punished, they're going to get punished quickly. But it all turns initially on us, the police, catching them in the first instance. And that's where things get tricky. Because we may not fully realize this, but for as many drunk drivers as we catch, we are missing 99 out of 100 easily. Easily. In fact, the research suggests that the average, for every time an individual gets arrested for drunk driving, they probably have taken anywhere between 100 and maybe 2,000 trips in their vehicle while impaired from alcohol. For every time they even get stopped by the police. Is that much of it going on? There are people, and many of you, the officers here, know them in your communities, that probably drink and drive every day of their lives. All right? You think of that person. And that person is basing his future decisions. Am I going to drink and drive this time based on his past experience? And his past experience tells him, well, I made it home from the bar drunk the last 100, 200, 1,000 times. What are the odds? Tonight is the night I get caught. And so their calculation typically tells them, well, I'll roll the dice again. I think I'll get away with it because I've gotten away with it. So the real challenge, the real big challenge for police is how, and Carl McDonald talked about this, how do we create in the mind of the potential offender, the driver who is also drinking, some fear, some apprehension, some belief that I might get stopped tonight. I might actually get stopped. And we have a lot of work to do to increase that probability because right now that probability is quite low. Right. Now we do know, we've talked a bit about things like checkpoints. Whether they're random checkpoints or selective checkpoints, where they're authorized, the research is fairly positive in terms of their deterrent effect. They can work. But as Carl had pointed out, they're also fairly expensive to run, and as the numbers that he introduced suggest, they turn out not to be the most efficient way for police to actually detect and apprehend drunk drivers. They're a good idea. I would encourage them, but not make them the be-all and end-all. Don't let that be the sole response of your agency to the problem. At least as important, again, as Carl had pointed out, is if you were a police administrator, to find ways in which you can encourage your officers to make a lot of traffic stops during high-risk times. We're talking about weekend nights, to make a lot of traffic stops so that the probability that a drinking driver will be detected is significantly increased. So getting your general patrol officers interested in the problem of drunk driving is every bit as important as creating a special unit or doing the occasional checkpoint. And that's where you're going to get most of your drunk driving arrests will in fact come from motivated patrol officers who understand the seriousness of the problem and know that their department values DUI enforcement. Now, here's where it gets even trickier. Remember, weekend nights. Right? So those of you who are patrol officers and those of you who used to be patrol officers will recognize this. What else is going on in your community weekend nights that might demand police time and attention? Everything, right? It's the busiest time for just about everything, for domestic violence, for bar fights, for motor vehicle crashes of other sorts, for everything's going on. Right? And now the public doesn't fully understand this. The cops do. There are, in fact, far fewer police officers out there on duty in the community at any time, including a weekend night, than most people would like to believe. A lot fewer. A lot fewer. And the patrol officers who are out there are acutely aware of this. And they know, for those of you who don't, making a drunk driving arrest can be time-consuming. I could, in my day, I could get it done in maybe 2 hours. Cops today tell me, those were the good old days. It's a 4-hour process or longer. So the patrol officer who's out there has to actually think. I mean, he's compelled to think hard about, can I afford to take myself out of service, along with probably a backup officer, 2 of us out of service for up to 4 hours, making one DUI arrest, given all that is going on in the city, all the other things we have to do, all the other officers who might need our assistance in backing them up on dangerous calls. It's not an easy choice. So the dilemma for the average patrol officer is, well, there are certain times when I just might decide I can't really afford to go looking for drunk drivers. But it's unfortunately at precisely the time and the place where we need them to be doing it. And here's the real hard thing for police administrators to think about is, well, how could you achieve both? How could you conserve your scarce resources of patrol officers and yet at the same time encourage them to at least stop people and investigate whether or not they've been drinking and make sure that they don't continue in a drunk driving trip? And part of that answer is going to be there need to be some alternatives to a commitment to a full custodial arrest for every suspected drinking driver. Because if the officers believe that if I stop this guy and I detect any alcohol, and it's been made clear to me that it's my job if I don't take him into custody, then, well, maybe I stop looking for them. Can't take that risk. So we need to think about, are there other things that we could do? Now, we're not talking about applying these for the seriously impaired driver, but for the drinking driver. And police officers have always done this. Not always comfortable admitting it, but they've done it. Do they take the person, give them a ride home? Do they confiscate the keys to the car? Do they get a sober person to come and pick that person up? Do they call them a taxi and get them a ride home? Do they do these other things to make sure the person doesn't drive impaired short of committing to the full custodial arrest? And a lot of that needs to happen. It has to be carefully thought through, and that's where police administrators need to get into the game and help the officers think that through. How do we increase substantially the number of stops that we're making without necessarily committing every one of those to a full custodial arrest? Given what we know about the deterrence theory and the need and the research it says we have to increase probability of intervention, that's something that we have to give a lot more serious thought to. So again, some of these alternatives, issuing warnings and maybe formally documenting these warnings so we know who's gotten these warnings in the past, having sober passengers drive, confiscating the keys or otherwise immobilizing the vehicle, having some arrangements with taxi companies that would be available instantly to come take people home and so forth. Most of the focus of police work And most of the focus, even in the drunk driving area, has really been on trying to deter offenders through punishment. But I would argue, and so in thinking about the different aspects of any crime problem using this crime triangle, if you need to have an offender and a target and a victim in some place where it occurs, most police attention has gone to deterring offenders. But I want to encourage us to think also about place management. Paying greater attention to the places that we know where people are doing the drinking that immediately precedes the driving. And in many communities, that's going to be the bars, taverns, nightclubs, and so forth. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in better policing, self-policing ideally, our policing of them if necessary, to get bars to serve liquor more responsibly. To take seriously that client who comes in to drink is their responsibility up to a certain point. That they are culpable for over-serving the fairly obviously inebriated person. And if you run a bar that is out in the middle of nowhere and the parking lot holds 2,000 cars, you got a pretty good idea that most of your customers got there by driving, which means that most of your patrons are thinking about driving when they leave. And that there needs to be some more responsible pressure placed on the bar owners and club managers to see that the over-serving doesn't occur. Now, I know this is difficult. A lot of police departments don't have a lot of the resources necessary, and doing over-serving enforcement is not easy. But I believe it can be a critical component even in controlling drunk driving. We'd also like to think about some other ways we try to change drivers' behavior through threat of punishment. And that has its merits, but there may be other ways to think about changing behavior. I want to mention one to you that's I found kind of interesting. And I was alerted to this by a colleague of mine, not at the law school at the University of Wisconsin, but at the business school. And he developed this concept, or helped to develop this concept called social marketing. Social marketing is essentially an idea in business about how can we make money off getting people to do good things. Now, in the context of drunk driving, we know that there are billions of dollars made in this country off promoting what is effectively very destructive, self-destructive, and other destructive behavior. We get people to drink. We get them to drink a lot. Right? And people are making enormous sums of money selling liquor to us. Well, would there be a way in which we could make some money off getting people to behave more responsibly as it relates to drinking and driving? This was an experiment that he tested with some of his business school students, and he piloted it and tried it and evaluated it in 6 different Wisconsin counties. Well, let me tell you, here's the basic picture. In Wisconsin, where whatever you think you know about drinking in Texas, you don't know drinking. We're not proud of it, or shouldn't be proud of it, but Wisconsin probably has the worst drinking problem of all 50 states. It is so deeply ingrained in the culture of Wisconsin. So you imagine our equivalent of Bubba, Tex, or whoever he might be, is this Wisconsin guy who's living in rural Wisconsin, where much of our state is rural, and he's thinking about socializing for the weekend evening. What's he going to do? This isn't a very long thought process. He's getting in his pickup truck and he's driving to the closest, his favorite tavern. He's going to have to drive because, again, it's a rural community. He can't walk there. And what's he going to do for the evening? Well, he's going to get drunk. He's going to get real drunk. He's going to get as drunk as he can get because that's what you do. This is almost non-negotiable. It's sad and it's a public health problem to be sure, but this is what the vast majority of people are doing. So now we want him at the end of the night to decide, I'm too drunk to drive. I'll just leave my pickup here in the parking lot, and I'll come get it tomorrow. Not going to happen. It is not going to happen. You're asking this person to make that kind of a decision while he is in his least capable state of mind, after he's had his 15 beers. So, the thinking here is the decision-making, the key decision-making is not at the end of the evening, it's at the beginning of the evening. It's the decision to take the pickup truck to the bar in the first instance that is almost inevitably going to lead to the drunk driving trip. So what if, and this is what Professor Rothschild was thinking, what if we could persuade him to leave the pickup at home? Well, how's that going to happen? So here's what he came up with. He said, well, and he had some focus groups with a bunch of the good old boys and asked them, what would it take to get you to leave the pickup truck at home? They said, well, it's going to take quite a lot. Because, you know, sometimes I'm going to need a ride, obviously. You've got to pick me up at home. And you've got to take me home at the end of the night. And sometimes I like to go to one bar to a different one, so you're going to have to take me around to different bars. And the professor kept saying, yeah, we can do that. We can do that. And they kept asking, well, could I have my buddies come along? Yeah, you could have your buddies come along. Could I drink while we're driving? Yeah, you could drink. Could I smoke? Yeah, you can drink and smoke. And so what they created was a company that was a limousine service. They were talking about rural Wisconsin, farms and cows and all that stuff. Right? The limo comes and picks you up at your house. You're going to pay $10 per customer per night, pick you up at your house, go pick up your buddies. You can smoke and drink in the limo. Going to take you to any bar you want to go to all night long and take you home. Now, that was the deal. Now, this was a business enterprise, and they needed to make money. It turned out that they were able to turn a profit, make money, and the careful evaluation of this indicated they were able to reduce drunk driving crashes as a direct result of this intervention by 17%. Obviously, cost effectively, it was actually generating money, not costing the government any money. Now, I don't offer it as the panacea, as the solution to all of this, but as a good example, and this kind of problem may be very familiar in some of the rural parts of this state as well. But as a way of promoting some thinking about, some fresh thinking about the nature of the problem and how the key decisions are being made by the people whose behavior we're trying to influence. This is, it was called the Road Crew, and if you're interested in further details and looking at the details of their study, their evaluation, you could find it online on that website. Again, and we've had lots of discussion of this today, but here we could begin to think about the vehicle as an essential tool in the crime of drunk driving. And this is, in fact, taking us into the whole realm of thinking about, forget about the decision-making of this intoxicated driver. Let's just make it physically impossible for him to drive. Right? We can do a lot of things, try to convince him not to drink so much, but if that fails, the fail-safe is the car won't start. And so the alcohol ignition interlock, again, the research is fairly strong and getting stronger, that it has a positive effect. And the day will come, I believe, we've had various predictions here, maybe 10 years from now, maybe 20 years, where it becomes standard inbuilt manufactured technology in all vehicles. Will still leave us another 20 years before all the old cars are off the road. But anyway, the technology is there to make a dramatic change in the basic opportunity structure to commit drunk driving. And beyond that, also alluded to here, the day is not that far off that we have the self-driving vehicle, right? Most of us in this room will probably live to see that as a dominant technology in our society. It's going to have, we can't predict all the impact that it will have, but wouldn't that be nice to have a vehicle that was so idiot-proof that the most impaired person could get in the car, push the big red button that says home, and the car just takes you home, right? It actually has potential, properly designed, to prevent more than just drunk driving crashes, but all kinds of following too closely and inattentive driving and all of that stuff. Now, we can't afford to just wait for that technology. It's going, but it will be here, and we ought to be giving some thought to what are going to be some of the spin-off effects, the unintended consequences of that technology. So again, just to reiterate on the improving bar management, I would also encourage you to take a look at a different guidebook that in this series that I also wrote called Assaults in and Around Bars. And in that guidebook, we cover a lot of the research on what do we know about how to reduce violence, alcohol-related violence in bars, and much of that is within the control of the bar owner and manager. That the same sets of ideas about responsible bar management can also have positive effects on controlling drunk driving. So I'll just encourage you, leave you with that. I encourage you to read through these two guidebooks on drunk driving and drug-impaired driving, as well as a few of the others. If you didn't get a copy of them, you can get all of these. They're all accessible free of charge on the website, popcenter.org, where you can order more from the Justice Department for no cost. With that, I'd welcome any comments or questions you might have. Questions will be taken at the end. Thank you.